Gordon M. Kranz is the former Deputy Director of Earned Value Management for the Office of PARCA. In his over 4 years in that role, he helped orchestrate some important changes that have impacted integrated program management and will do so for years to come. He is now the President of Enlightened Integrated Program Management with offices in Alexandria, Virginia. I recently had an opportunity to speak to him in southern Florida during the middle of a thunderstorm. I asked him about his background that led to his success.
I haven't been in the EV community for 30 years. I've been in the DoD acquisition for 33 some odd years. And I was in the Air Force for 10 years working in the program office, and that's where I learned earned value, primarily on the F-22 program back in early 90s. And then I got out and I was in industry for 16 years, and we did earn value on IRAD projects and and our programs that required it, that kind of thing.
And who were you with then?
I was with General Dynamics. It was actually Control Data Government Systems became Computing Devices International, which became General Dynamics IS, and then GDAIS, and then GDC4S. Roles. I came out of the Air Force and I started as a system engineer, sort of technical arm of the marketing department, try to, win some business, doing that kind of thing, where I would, develop, potential architectures for, avionics for, AWACS or F-16 or, F-15 or, that kind of thing, and try to go hawk our mission computer, that sort of stuff. And then I was a system engineer on a couple of programs, actually executing a couple of programs where there was a couple of V-22 actually. The mission computer on V-22 is a General Dynamics computer. And then I became chief engineer of the avionics business unit, about $100 million business unit, where I ran the IRAD, a couple $1 million worth of IRAD to try to figure out how do we sell the next generation of product. And we grew out of AYK-14s, where we essentially developed a computer from scratch. The instruction set architecture was, we developed it. Well, then in the 90s they said they wanted to do COTS, and so COTS to us was taking the chipsets, the Intel or the MIPS or chipsets, and doing a military package on a single board computer. And then that migrated into the 2000s, where we would buy the single board computer, but it was ruggedized, so somebody else ruggedized it. So
you could throw it up here and fall, like it crash, and it keeps on
ticking. Shake, rattle, and roll, all that kind of stuff. And so then we would integrate that into a chassis that had a whole bunch of capabilities. So the IRAD was focused on sort of our typical picture was an internet base where you have all these lightning bolts going to the different vehicles and the comms. And so inside those vehicles, you would need network capability, you'd need disk storage, you'd need mission computing, you'd need display processing, you'd need signal processing, all that kind of stuff, and then you'd need comms to be able to communicate all that stuff around. And that was getting where you could integrate that all into a box or two. And so I kind of instituted a scenario-based requirements development process where we took, I think the scenario that I used was an F-18 that would, had or an F-14, had a sortie where it would take off from somewhere, and it would go and it would drop a bomb somewhere. In process, it would communicate with AWACS to try to figure out how to get an in-process update in case the target moved and that kind of thing. And so we walked through it step by step and then say, okay, so at this step in the process, what kind of capability would be required in any of these vehicles that our mission computer could provide? What kind of activity would be happening, so that we could actually then say, okay, well, is that a capability that we should be developing? And should we have an IRAD project to go? And one of the things was we weren't that great in display processing, so we did a bunch of we spent some money in display processing and the mapping tool, where you actually have to map, and it's a lot more than the GPS. You think of a GPS map in Google. Well, this is back 10 or 15 years.
A little different back then, wasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. You get these you get this background map, but then you get the GPS signal, and then you got to figure out how to get the actual aircraft that you're seeing correlated with the actual coordinates of the map. So anyway, so I did all that stuff, did that good, and then I got an opportunity to come back into 18L at the policy level, and there was a job open that I qualified for, and so then I ended up being able to come back in at a fairly high level in the Pentagon to do some things there. And so I had a variety of jobs before I got the earned value one. Director of Systems and Software Engineering, and in 2008, well, in 2009, the WSARA, Weapons System Acquisition Reform Act, that essentially said, hey, we want this office. This office has been around for 10 years. I've been there 3 months. We want it to split up because it had system engineering and development test and then and evaluation. And we want to raise its level of authority in the 18L environment so they have more say in the DAB process. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of what WSARA was. Well, interesting enough, the WSARA also asked for PARCA.
Oh, okay.
So when they did that, when they split the organizations, I was a career person, and they split it up, and then they moved it over into a different organization, into DDR&E. And they said that the people leading these organizations needed to be political appointees, not just career folks. So then I went to DCMA for a year and a half, and then they moved, and then that's where I owned the Earned Value Center, and I owned all of their engineering and analysis policy and how they do stuff in the field. And then they moved down to Richmond, and I was in Virginia, so I was up, Northern Virginia. So then I went to, and I'd established a relationship with Gary Bliss because DCMA, and PARCA, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I went to Gary, said, hey, you've got an open spot on that EV thing. I think I can do that for you. And so he says, well, okay, well, I don't think you're the right guy to do it, but whatever. You're the only guy I got right now. So he gave me the job, and then we were consistent in philosophy. He wanted to.
Okay, so he gave you the job. So what was
the job? Was the Deputy Director PARCA for Earned Value Management.
Okay, so what you have this very recent and very relevant set of information that came from your involvement with DCMA, right?
Yes.
So you were kind of hitting the ground with your feet in motion on this.
Yes.
You had. How would you characterize where things were at that time and what you identified as what you thought were some of the challenges that you were facing at that time?
Well, so while I was at DCMA, the Earned Value Center was certainly one of the most. It was a decent-sized organization, a lot of talented folks. Had a mission to help earn value, improve earned value across the department, and they were doing that. But there was a fairly. The focus was on compliance, and so a lot of folks were just afraid of the compliance. And the focus really wasn't on earned value; it was really just a program management tool. And you need to be compliant so that your data is accurate, but you need to be using it to manage your program.
What was the catalyst for you to see that to be so important? Like what? It's not. I mean, it's obvious now, okay, but I'm not sure how obvious it was at that time.
It has to do with the fact that I used earned value to run programs,
okay,
and I used it effectively,
okay,
and I didn't take it all that serious as far as the mechanics of whether I was plus or minus, $1 or $2 off here, that kind of thing. I was worried about, hey, in general, are we ahead of schedule, behind schedule?
Right.
And we would have weekly IPT meetings where we would say that the system engineering team who were supposed to be developing the requirements for a chassis to fit all these modules in, if they said they were 100% done, in their EV, well then obviously the component designers had all the information they needed in order to go do their software and or hardware at the component level. And in a lot of cases that wasn't the case. You'd see that things weren't happening, and the component guy would say, well, I need this piece of information from the chassis guys, and they say they're done, they're not working anymore. Okay, well then you'd you'd work together to figure out, okay, well, how do we get that information together as a team? So I used it as an effective tool to manage the program.
This is back when you were...
Back when I was in industry at General Dynamics.
Right, okay.
When I saw people doing earned value compliance, and I knew what the real purpose of earned value, and I've actually used earned value to run programs successfully, I could see that you could get too overly sensitive to the compliant aspects if you don't really understand, if you don't step back and say, well, why am I doing this portion of the thing? You know, why am I decomposing this WBS to this level? You know, why a great example is the cost community has these CSDRs where they used to approve WBSs, and they still kind of would. They would take a WBS, they say, well, I need recurring and non-recurring for every WBS. And companies would say, okay, well, I need a control account, then a recurring control account. And
Sure, so it's just getting crazy then.
And those control accounts were just there as cost collectors.
Right, right.
So, well, that doesn't make sense, right? So you say, okay, well, control accounts can have work packages underneath them, and you can have charge numbers underneath there.
Right.
And you can collect costs at a lower level, and you don't have to proliferate a bunch of control accounts. So there was a couple things as to why I thought that a change needed to happen. Number one is that I've used it, and compliance is important, but it's not the sole focus. And second of all is that I noticed, one of the first things I noticed when I came into the office is that the collaboration between industry and the government was not where I thought it should be. You know, you'd hear these anecdotal, you know, EV is difficult to do because of this or because of that, or you know, this agency's doing this and I can't accomplish, you know, what I want to there. And so, you know, my mantra was, okay, bring facts and data, and then I can look into it.
And you were in an incredible position to be able to do something about it.
Yeah. And I had the support from my boss. So, you know, I mean, you know, Mr. Bliss was all about industry collaboration and, you know, try to understand what the real issues are. And so having that support, and then he trusted, you know, to me to go run with that. But it was all about bring facts and data. If you're going to bring me an issue, I can't fix it unless I know facts and data.
Right. Right.
And so we pushed for that. And so the key thing, you know, the most important thrust that I had in mind was to get collaboration between industry and government established, so that we could have candid discussions about what the real issues were and go fix those real issues, if they were issues at all, because it ended up 99% of the things that were perceived as issues, once you got the right people talking, they were just talking past each other. You know, they were, you know, somebody was, you know, assuming one thing and saying, you know, they were using this, you know, similar terms but meaning something. And so without that collaboration, you can't really understand what the real issue is and how to solve it. And in a lot of cases, you'll go solve the wrong problem.
Right, right. So you were in your position for how many years at PARCA?
4.5.
4.5. So so kind of give me, if you can, like a timeline of the things that happened over those 4 years. A very high level kind of timeline.
Well, so the first year was focused on, number one, we had to establish some authority. So we established an authorities memo, got it coordinated with all of the departments and DCMA, and to say this is what the PARCA EVM authorities are, and it got signed out by the AT&L at the time. And so that was one of the first things. The second thing was to try to establish a preliminary competency model for EV, because there wasn't an overarching competency model that would drive the class material that DAU teaches to all of the government, you know, acquisition professionals. So we had to establish a competency model, and so we established a very early version of the competency model. You know, so that was all within the first 6 months that we were able to do that. And then, you know, in the meantime, we were working with updating the CPR and the IMS DIDs.
Right.
And they'd been working that for a year or two to say what is the right thing to do here, because we should refresh them. They've been around for a while. And then we and oh, by the way, we want them electronically submitted in a standard format so that we can do some correlation and that sort of thing between the two. You take the WBS and you can click on it and you can go between the cost and the schedule.
Right.
So that was the reason we wanted to have an electronic IPMR, was to facilitate the analysis.
Right. Right.
And then there was actually a person from DCMA that was at one of our IPT meetings and says, well, why don't you just make one DID? And I thought about it for about 5 seconds, and I said, yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
What an idea.
And so then it turned into an IPM.
Now, just how long does it take to redo a DID? Like how long? I mean, just roughly how long?
It depends. We were actually fairly aggressive and got things done a little bit quicker than typical. But to refresh a DID is typically, you say maybe a year to kind of think about it and do some updates, do some collaboration with industry, and then to finalize it. So it can take 18 months to 2 years kind of thing. There was an earthquake the summer of 2011, and we were in a meeting. That was the meeting we talked about smashing it together. Maybe that's why we had an earthquake. And we published that DID 1 year later.
Okay.
But there had been a lot of legwork. But I formed an IPT. We got people across the department, all the EV experts, and to sit down and to put the two DIDs together, and then we put it out to industry for I think 30 days, got some stuff, and then we put it back out to industry for another 60 days, something like that.
Yeah. Wow. And the kind of things that you dealt with the government side, in, for instance, rewriting the DID and the impact that it had on program managers, and the kind of reaction support you were getting, how would that differ from the way that industry was reacting to that process?
Because we didn't really change that much.
Okay.
Other than the format in which we were going to receive the schedule.
Right. Yeah.
But the actual requirements, there was a few more things we added to the schedule, I think. So there was, we would have industry meetings to talk about, that. But there wasn't a significant enough change to where there was an uproar in industry. So that was actually pretty smooth. But I think part of it was industry was part of collaborating on the original CPR and
Right.
IMS. So
Okay.
there wasn't a whole bunch of stuff that was new to them in the end. So that was why that went
Okay.
fairly smooth.
All the change we've been seeing going on in the past couple of years with the ways in which surveillance is taking place, and now of course there's this whole move which was starting to take place around the time you left, and it's going toward this automated approach. One of the things I just wonder about, and maybe other people wonder about, where do you think earned value is headed?
I'm going to have to presuppose as to how it used to fit in. I mean, I used it as a program management tool, and I can continue to see it as a program management tool. But I see that the electronic submission allows people to open up the analysis window as to the kinds of things, the kinds of trends that you can look for, and the kinds of data that you can look, so that you're not just getting a piece of a spreadsheet. Imagine a Format 1, which is a spreadsheet piece of information, and people thought it was cool that you could red, yellow, green code that spreadsheet and know where you're. Okay, well, imagine now we're going to have pictures. We're going to have WBSs, that's actually the pictures of the aircraft or the vehicles, and over time they're, and you'll see the picture of the vehicle that will, you see that, the engine here, that's red. Okay, we'll click on it. Why is it red? Okay, well, the TPMs are out of whack here. Because of EV data, we're spending too much money here. So I see that, we're getting to a point where all of the information, not just earned value, cost, and schedule data, but the technical data like TPMs and integration status and requirements maturity status and all those different trends that the system engineers do, can be presented in a dashboard format in front of a program manager. And the thing is we have a glut of information, just like they do in the battlefield. And what do they do there? They try to figure out how do you provide the right information at the right time, so they have the commanders do the right thing at the right time. So we're trying to filter through that data and present the information to the program manager, so that today, when you're seeing that data, what is it telling you that you need to?
Is change happening fast enough to remain relevant?
As far as from an earned value perspective, Well, I like where the department is headed with this expanded Format 7. I think that, you know, the IPMR did that, sort of notionally thought about it in different formats when all we're doing is dumping a database. You know, they should have just focused on, you know, we should have just focused on dumping a data, and that's kind of what the Format 7 is going to do. So I see the reports might migrate away from actually these more spreadsheet looking reports, Format 1, 2, 3, 4, where when you see the staffing plan, you get the graph instead, or, you know, when you see the, you know, the baseline changes, you see tornado charts, or, you know, or Pareto charts, you know, that kind of thing, instead of the raw data that you end up getting.
Do you think that the reaction to, or response, or the kind of adaptation to Agile, the way it's taken place, has been as good as it could have been before?
So that's an interesting question there. So let me tell you how it happened, and then I'll try to provide some you know, I guess my opinion about whether maybe if we had more forethought it could have happened differently.
Okay.
I have this, I'm not in the government anymore. We had this government IPT, where the IPT leads across the department, you know, Army, Air Force, Navy, MDA, you know, that kind of thing. We had this group that would get together, and we'd every couple of months, and we'd say, hey, what's going on? And we would have the department EVM leads, and the field feedback that we would get would be through them. Well, so this was probably mid-2014. That both the Army and the Air Force says, hey, we're having our programs come and ask us about earned value and Agile, right? So it finally bubbled up to them that, hey, we're trying to do this stuff, and we're here, you know, the contractors are saying earned value doesn't apply when Agile applies. So those are things that why we have that IPT. We say, okay, well, we ought to look into that. It looks like a systemic issue. And so that's when, you know, went to NDIA and says, you know, hey, you guys are doing Agile. We need to know more about Agile. We should collaborate about that. We wanted to establish an NDIA subgroup that had government and industry participation. And apparently it was exactly the right time, because it was like wildfire. I mean, it's like you light a match and boom, all of a sudden, you know, we had extreme interest in the government. The government says, oh yeah, you know, we've been interested about this for a while, but, you know, now we've got somebody who's actually pulling meetings together, you know, that kind of thing. We've had, you know, within a few months, we had enough industry support where we held a meeting, and 4 or 5 industry folks who've been trying to do Agile and EV for 5 or 6 years actually came out and said, here's how we're doing it. And we're okay with the fact that they may not have been doing it perfectly. So the environment of collaboration we established prior to 2014 offered up the ability to take this problem about Agile and EV, because the first thing you're going to think about is that, well, compliance. How is Agile compliant? You know, you know, I was a naysayer at the beginning, saying, you know, this Agile is, you know, these guys who don't really want to be held accountable, that kind of thing. Well, it's just the opposite.
You're saying we're seeing a successful transition going on right now, then?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, the amount of energy and synergy we're having about, and the collaboration we're having about the issues that are happening in the Agile EVM world are, I couldn't be happier. We haven't solved the problem yet, right? Because there's still a lot of things to work through. But we're actually have an environment of collaboration that allows people to candidly talk about what the issues are, and have it be okay that you disagree for a while, right? And then sort through that. So I think that actually the NDIA guide that got published just recently is an enormous step forward. That basically starts to outline best practices that allow us to continue to have the more detailed discussions. Okay, well, if these are best practices, what happens when you take progress and your story points go back and forth?
Right,
the denominator changes.
Right.
Well, we can't even have those conversations if you're having issues about, well, where do you draw the where do you draw the line for
where does
control
measure take place?
that kind of thing.
Right.
So
I hope that we have program managers both from the government side and from the contracting side who have reasons to want to hear what you have to say. And this is a great opportunity. If you have something you'd like to share about things that you believe, things that you care about, the things that you would like program managers, particularly ones that are starting out, to things they need to be aware of, things they need to work on.
What I would instill in them is that earned value is program management. They're one and the same. Had a conversation, earlier today with some folks, and how many program managers disagree that you have to understand your work scope? How many program managers disagree that you have to understand the resources that you need to apply to that work scope in order to, how many program managers disagree that you need to track progress against, a plan that you established, that you have to have some sort of a plan so you know what you're going to do tomorrow? How many program managers, disagree with the fact that you take that information of tracking status and then try to figure out how do you update your plan
Right.
and make decisions? Well, when you put it that way, there's very few, if any, program managers that can say, I don't want none of that.
Right.
Okay, well, they want all of it, and what they want is they want EV. The issue, I think, becomes is that at what level of thoroughness do you collect progress, and what level of detail, and sometimes when you get into the compliance arena, people worry about things that abstract them. But EV is program management. That's all it is. That's why we went down the path a few years ago. Or actually, one of the first conferences I was at, I said, 5 years from now, I hope we are not using earned value. I hope we use something like integrated discipline program management.
And look what's happening.
Because if we focus the practice on program management, then the actual EV compliance should be a byproduct.
Right, it just happens.